Rica! Welcome to this special Taíno culture episode. I'm Priscilla Colon, co-founder and creative here at Kasíke, where our mission is to promote the Taíno language and culture. So today we have part 3 of our mini-series on Taíno female chiefs. We're going to be talking about the female chiefs of Borikén, Puerto Rico. Now, as I've mentioned in previous videos, some of the things we're going to talk about may not be suitable for young children, so make sure that you're pre-screening this episode before you allow your young children to watch it, or maybe you may want to skip over some parts. In the meantime, let's get started talking about Borikén. As you can see from the map, Borikén was divided into 24 chiefdoms. That is a lot more than the 5 chiefdoms of Aitiki that we talked about last week. Now, each of these chiefdoms was also subdivided with their own chiefs. So let's talk about the principal chief of Borikén when the colonizers first came. This comes from the chronicles of Gonzalo Fernández de Oviedo. He went to the principal chief of that island, who was called Guayervas, and the chief's mother and stepfather showed that they enjoyed the Christians. And Captain Juan Ponce named this female chief Doña Inés, and her husband Don Francisco. This chief was very obedient to his mother, and she was a good woman, and as she was older, she knew what had occurred during the conquest and pacification of the island of Hispaniola, and she prudently advised her son and the Indians to be good to their friends, the Christians, if they didn't want to die by their hand. And due to these warnings, the son walked with Captain Juan Ponce and gave him his sister as a friend. Now, there is a lot to break down from this quote, so let's start at the beginning. Guayervas is the principal chief of Borikén. He has the largest territory, and that chiefdom was called Guainía. There's something very important in what we just read. Only Inés, the chief's mother, and Guayervas are called chief, not the stepfather. And as you can tell from what we read, even though Guayervas is the principal chief of the island, his primary advisor is his mother. So in this case, even though the female is not the primary chief, she is the primary advisor. She might as well be called a co-chief. And what's important to note is that Inés is very much aware of what is going on the island of Aitiki, the way Taínos there have been enslaved. So she is advising her son to be more diplomatic with the Christians, to try to befriend them. Toward the end of what we read, you hear that Guayervas walks with Juan Ponce de León. Juan Ponce de León was the Spanish governor who was established by the crown. Now, they're trying to create an alliance, right? Because that's what his mother advised him to do. So, if we can read between the lines, we can see that Guainía, Guayervas' sister, is going to be in a relationship with Juan Ponce de León to establish some sort of alliance between the quote-unquote Christians and the Taínos. And that makes sense because the next person in line to be chief would be Guainía and or her children. And so we see that, for example, in the story of Caonabo and Anacaona, where the next chief in line, Anacaona, marries Caonabo, who's the chief. And so they create an alliance between these two chiefdoms. As I mentioned last week, some of the relationships that we will hear about are sometimes called friendships or marriages. Again, we don't know what that actually meant to our Taíno ancestors. The other thing you have to understand is the chronicles that I'm reading from were written by Spanish men. So they have their own ideas or interpretations of how things happen. So for example, if Guayervas is talking to Juan Ponce de León and quote unquote offers his sister, it may have been more like, hey, we can create an alliance between our people and my sister is interested in you, so why don't we come to some sort of agreement? So what I'm trying to say is that women weren't playing a passive role in this. They weren't just being offered up. They actually had a very important role. In this case, Guainía would have been the next chief or one of her children. Therefore, she has the power in this situation. It is simply that the Spanish may not have understood how protocols worked. Now let's talk about one famous female cacique of Borikén, and she is Kasíke Yuíza. Kasíke Yuíza was the chief of the Aymaño chiefdom, and she led 160 Taínos. It was one of the first villages forced to work in plantations and mines. Now, before we proceed, I have to give you the first trigger warning. We are going to find out what happened to Kasíke Yuíza. So, if you have young children, make sure that you're pre-screening this part. It is said that Kasíke Yuíza had a relationship with Pedro Mejia, a free black conquistador. That's right, colonization isn't as black and white as we may like it to be, pun intended. There were many conquistadors who were also black. As you may know, Spain was conquered by the Moors for a very long time before the Catholic kings came into power. Now, it's said that Yuíza died during an uprising in 1510. She was supposedly killed by quote-unquote Caribs while defending Pedro Mejia. Now, we don't really know the circumstances under which Kasíke Yuíza died. Some people say that it was an uprising of her people as they were being led to their plantations or mines to work that day. Other people say that they were attacked by quote-unquote Caribs, those cannibals who were always attacking the Taínos. And other people say that it was Taínos themselves who attacked her and Pedro Mejia. Over time, the colonizers took this story and kind of twisted it around. She became like Pocahontas, throwing herself in front of her lover to save him from death. Nowadays, most people don't believe that's actually what may have happened, so we may never really know. However, we do know that there was a Kasíke Yuíza, and that is what we can celebrate today. One thing that researchers have realized is that the Spaniards weren't going out of their way to write down the names of all of these female chiefs. They had to do a lot of digging to find them. Sometimes the names of these female chiefs are found in legal documents. They would find that a Spaniard would sue another Spaniard for ownership of a certain bunch of Taínos. And in passing, they would happen to mention the name of the female chief. The origins or chiefdoms that these female chiefs belong to may not have even been mentioned in these lawsuits. So for example, we know that Juana was from Aymaño, the same chiefdom as Yuíza. But then there's another Luisa, a second person, with an unknown region. There's María Baguanamay, who could have been from the region called Toa. And then there was María Yaboneito, who was from Aybonito. The other problem that started happening was that all of these women's names were changed to their quote-unquote Christian or Catholic names. So we don't even have their original names. And you'll notice that a lot of these names were being repeated. Women were being named Luisa, and then there was another Luisa, or 5,000 Marias. So it becomes very difficult to track which chief they mean. Now, let's talk about a famous cacique, a brave warrior, a fighter, whose name has practically been wiped from history. In a document called La Probanza de Juan González, written around 1532, it is written, "They captured alive 16 great lords and one great lady by the name of Guayervas." Now, what this chronicle is mentioning is something that happened during the Spanish Taíno War. This was a war that lasted between 1511 and 1529. Now, as I was digging into this topic, I came across information that showed that even this war, people were trying to keep it quiet. In history, it became known as the Taíno Rebellion of 1511, as if it was a little skirmish that happened in 1 year. Actually, it was a full-on war, and it included all Taíno chiefdoms from all over the islands, including Vieques and even other islands of the Lesser Antilles. This war was led by Agüeybaná II, also called Agüeybaná the Brave or the Valiant. Now, this Agüeybaná was actually the first Agüeybaná's brother, the one that we talked about who was the principal chief at the beginning of colonization. So, as you can tell, diplomacy, the alliance between the Taínos and the Spanish, did not work out. In the chronicle that we just read, they mentioned that they captured a female cacique named Guayervas, and she participated in this war. Guayervas and her fighters were from Otoao, and they were associated with the burning of Caparra, which was the first Spanish capital of Borikén. But she was systematically erased from history. Now, the researchers had to go back to the original documents to be able to find her name, because not only was her name erased from subsequent documents, she was also turned into a male chief as well. Now we're going to talk about female chiefs who were co-chiefs with other female chiefs and male chiefs as well. So let's take a look at the chiefdom of Turabo. Documents identify Yaya and Catalina as female chiefs, each with their own Taínos. And they took turns with the male chief Caguax to work in the mines and on a plantation. So even though this map shows us, and history indicates that Caguax was the main or principal chief of these areas, in actuality, he was co-chief with two other female chiefs. The interesting part here is that Yaya is actually the matriarch. She's the mother. Catalina is her daughter, and Caguas is her son. Now, as you can tell, in this encomienda system, which we talked about last week, all chiefs and the Taínos they led had to serve or work in plantations or mines. Now let's talk about what happened. So first, Catalina died, but she didn't have any children. Then Caguax died. Now there was another sister, Isabel, who had a daughter, María, who was the next chief in line. She was only 9 years old. Now comes a trigger warning. If you have children, please, please, please pre-screen this section. It is not suitable for the young ones. So make sure that you either skip it or pre-screen it depending on your children's age. So let's talk about María. The estate was run by unscrupulous administrators that subjected the young chief to despicable sexual relations. That year, the Bishop of Santo Domingo passed through and intervened in the already scandalous situation, removing the chief from the estate and orchestrating her marriage to the last of the royal administrators, Diego Muriel. The couple had 3 children, and María was the last female ruler that we know of. This young girl, at just 9 years old, becomes chief. Then she is molested for years. At 14 years old or 19, we don't really know, but at a young age, she is forced to marry one of the administrators, possibly one of the people who has been molesting her. As the chronicles tell us, she had children with her husband, but she and her children died tragically when their ship sunk in the middle of a hurricane. And that is the last female chief of Borikén that we know of. As we did last week, I would love to take a moment to read the names of the female chiefs of Borikén. I'm sure that there were way more than the ones that we have listed. And as you remember, you'll see some of their quote-unquote Christian names, so we may never know their Taíno names. However, this is a way that we can honor them in this moment today. Inés of Guainía, Yuíza of Aymanio, Juana of Aymanio, Luisa of an unknown region, María Yaboneito of Aybonito, Guayervas of Otoao, Yayo of Turabo, Catalina of Turabo, María of Turabo, Isabel of Turabo, Isabel Cayaguax of Calley, María Baguanamay, possibly of Toa, Coabuca of an unknown region. So, as you can tell from many of the stories that we've read, definitely there were female chiefs, advisors, and so many other leaders in the Americas before colonization. They were leaders in North and South America, in the Caribbean. They were clan mothers, primary advisors, chiefs of individual regions, and they were co-chiefs with family members. They were warriors and diplomats. Their clans were torn apart, they were scorned, abused, enslaved, and history minimized many of their contributions. But I want to make sure that we are honoring them, and even if we don't know their names, that we're thinking of them, because I know that they're here to guide us. In the meantime, tay karaya guaitiao nagu.